Hey, everybody, this is Dan Keldsen, Chief Innovation Officer with InfoCap.ai. And this episode of Next Future Today, I'm speaking with JJ Dacanay, a strategic IT executive and fractional CIO, who I met on a CIO roundtable a couple months ago. And he noticed a certain item that I won't expose at the moment that was on my desk. And we had an instant awareness of some common connections. What I didn't understand is that his career path is one of the most interesting careers that I've heard, that goes all the way back to the 80s, selling high-end vacuum cleaners door to door in Compton, in gang territory, for 2.5 years, it turns out, and includes also working with Jeff Bezos at Blue Origin with a the kind of budget and responsibility that most people never will ever experience, and how those extremes are actually very similar and can be used in regular everyday people's lives like you and I. And just a really interesting conversation, very empowering, lots of very practical tips. He doesn't pretend to have known and done everything perfectly. A lot of his careers come through just showing up and taking on opportunities that have arisen. And I'll leave it at that because it's just such a fascinating discussion, and we cover a ton of territory that I think, if you'll wander through with us, that you might find some inspiration in some ways that you might be able to tackle some problems that you thought were much bigger than they actually are and could be perhaps seen in a different light. Anyhow, why don't we just go straight to it? So, JJ Dacanay, what's the best way to describe you? So, what title do you prefer to go by, and what organization these days?
So my last adventure was with Blue Origin. We were launching rockets into space. And what I did there was I started out building their PMO and then taking over a bunch of projects that were on fire, right? Still remember 2 weeks in, my boss, I walk into a meeting like 5 minutes early, and he says, "I know who can fix this problem. That guy right there." And he points to me, and I'm like, "What? I'm not even supposed to be here." And what happened was there was a project that was a year late, and our number one client, which was the New Shepard team that does the space tourism. You've probably seen them in a lot of news. They put a bunch. William Shatner went up in the Blue Origin rocket.
Yeah.
Captain Kirk himself.
Yeah.
And so that what the project was, we had a lot of, I guess, maintenance records and turn around the rocket to launch it again. It was all done on paper. So this project was called e-procedures, and it was going to bring that to the 21st century, right? We were going to use sensors on the rocket that would communicate with your handheld devices or your iPads and stuff, and it would automate all that stuff. So I went in there, identified what the problem was, and because I'm under a 27-page non-disclosure, I can't talk about those problems. But, we fixed the problems, and later we delivered in the first quarter that I was involved on time, those set of features. And by the time the next quarter rolled around, everything was done. So I became known as the hammer, all right? I'd go in there and like solve problems. Then I went
In a good way.
Yeah, in a good way. Yeah. So took over bigger and bigger projects. Did all the M&As for suppliers. Whenever there was a critical supplier that we needed, because you work for the second richest man in the world, we just bought them and then brought them on board in the company. And it was my job to integrate their technology into Blue, and vice versa.
Okay.
So now I do fractional CIO work.
Yeah.
I work with 4 small companies between government and commercial. By small, I mean between like 50 and $200 million, because that's pretty small nowadays. Helping them with their IT strategy, helping them with AI, and helping them solve their problems like I solved at Blue.
Right. That's fascinating. So my aunt and uncle they were rocket scientists.
That's
Southern
awesome.
California would build rockets. Never really knew what they were doing because, of course, they couldn't talk about it. And that was like the golden age of rockets and everything that went around that. And my dad was a organic chemistry professor, so I got a different taste of that, like Richard Feynman and all that kind of stuff. Even though I pursued music, so go figure. And then I turned around and went to tech. That's fascinating. And I've run into a surprising number of people that are ex NASA or related newer startups that have happened more recently.
I think what happened after the Cold War ended was a lot of the money that went to NASA kind of got rolled away, right? And there was a big gap in, I will say, commercial space exploration. A lot of it went into satellites. So for a long time, I would say in the late 90s to the early 2000s, and this was before SpaceX took off, I was involved in a satellite company called TerraStar. And their goal was, I think if you look at the old satellite phones, it was this giant brick. And this is for the people who had cell phones in the 80s and late 80s and
Right.
stuff, right?
That were wired.
Yeah, it
in,
was
so
wide, it had this giant antenna, and it was very uncool, right? It wasn't a StarTAC that you pulled out and you look cool talking to it. And the problem with that was, it was expensive to talk and there wasn't a lot of bandwidth. So what TerraStar's solution was, hey, let's make the satellite do the work. You can put a TerraStar SIM card into this mobile phone, into your smartphone, and then suddenly your smartphone can be a satellite phone. So when Katrina happened and there was a lot of development in South America where there wasn't infrastructure, we could use the satellites to talk, right?
so your background is kind of uncommon, I would say.
Very weird. My first job was selling vacuum cleaners door to door, Kirby's, if you believe it, in Southern California. And that's
You could have
fresh
sold
out of
them to my
college.
aunt and uncle.
I could have. Maybe I did.
Maybe Santa Barbara is where they live.
We were, so interesting enough, the vacuum cleaner was probably super expensive then, still expensive now, because I still remember it's $13.88 plus tax.
Oh my God.
And we sold it in the worst neighborhoods in Southern California. We sold it in Watts, in Compton, in Southgate, all the gang infested areas. And I guess people didn't realize that they were buying a vacuum cleaner that was worth more than their car at that time. but that's where all the Kirby's were being sold.
That is wild. So how does that play into the rest of your career then? 'Cause those are two very different extremes that you just talked about. So extreme wealth and extreme poverty, and getting things done, right? So how is that translated into like the fractional CIO work?
Well, I think the lesson I learned from my first job was first, I didn't know any better because my dad had gotten me that job. He was a service manager at that time. I thought, hey, this is what I gotta go through, because I had flown from the Philippines to America, a fresh college graduate. My dad, said, hey, I think I flew in on a Friday, got to spend the weekend at the beach in California, and then on Monday he had me working. I did not have a sabbatical like most college students did, right? They took a year off or whatever, go to Paris or go to South America. Nope, I got to work like after a weekend of college.
Okay.
And I thought, hey, I guess this is the way things work in America. I mean, you start out with a crappy job and you just suck it up, right?
Right.
So I did that for 2.5 years.
Your experience in post 9/11 and Oklahoma bombing and working for the one of the richest men in the world, that gives you a pretty big context that probably I would think that makes it seem like most problems are actually not really all that big a deal.
Absolutely. I think it's all, at the end of the day, no matter what happens, just one thing you can always control, and that's your attitude. Everything else can blow up around you. You can go from, the high of highs to the low of lows, but it's still your attitude. I think that's the secret weapon along with persistence, because that's the difference between winners and people who give up, right? The winner is just the person who stood up one more time when they were rejected.
Right.
And I think being you and I are both regular guys, I think you're going to get a lot more rejection, especially when you ask for dates. Than we're not Tom Brady, we're not Brad Pitt, right? So we're going to get a lot more rejection. As my old boss used to say, you're going to get a lot more rejection in one day than the average person gets in a year, unless they go to a bad nightclub when you go door to door.
So putting your reps in is
it's essential,
useful.
right?
Yeah.
And I think kids these days, young people like my kids, they don't like rejection. All right, they're afraid of it,
Right.
so they don't
Yeah.
even bother to ask. So I always tell my son and my daughter, you're going to lose 100% of all those opportunities that you never go for. Right? It's
Yeah.
an
Exactly.
automatic loss.
Yeah.
So would you
Yeah.
rather have a 1% chance or a 100% loss? Take your pick.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Going back to your
No.
question about dying to technology, at some point in my career, and this was in the early days when I still had hair, one of my friends who was he got a job as a director in an ISP, an internet service provider, back in the early days. And he said, "Hey, why don't you move over to the technology side? You're great in sales, but I think long term you make more money, and you like computers. Go into technology with me, and I will teach you technology."
Hmm.
So I got my first mentor, joined an ISP. It was called Case Internet, Capital Area Internet Service. When I joined, it was 300 people. And then at the height of the dot-com boom, we turned to 1,000 people, and we did 80% of the internet. And this was before internet was widely available. So we did internet in kiosks at airports, every place that could do internet. Like we did internet for apartment buildings and hotels. So this was the day that if you wanted to do internet in your hotel room, you'd have to pay this extra charge. Right now, it's all free.
Right.
Unless you go to like a Ritz, well, they charge you for everything. Right? I think they
Right.
charge you for the air that you breathe in your room.
Right. It's rare air.
Yeah. So that business actually blew up because the owner at that time had a Marriott. And, he said, "Hey, let's put this in all hotels." So we signed all the hotels in the US, Marriott, Hilton, all these places. And it was
Wow.
a great experience until the crash happened. Because,
Yeah.
with all your options at that time, you're like, I'm going to be a millionaire. I'll never have to work again. I'll be
Yeah.
like that AOL janitor who retired a millionaire.
Right.
Then the crash happened, and of course, you couldn't exercise your options right
Yeah.
before the crash, and we all
Right.
had to go back to work again, find
Yeah.
some new jobs in technology.
Yeah.
But I think you remember those days because if you had an idea like, "Hey, I'm going to sell dog poop on the internet," people would like run to you and throw you money, right? Like, "Okay, here's $1 million. Start your
Right.
business today."
Yeah. Just like AI today.
Oh, I'm glad you pointed that out because I was going to go there.
So let's talk modern day concerns for businesses or
Sure.
government agencies. A lot of the work that we do at InfoCap is like 90% federal or state government and some military branches. When you and I talked before this, we were talking about automation. We met through a CIO roundtable a month or two ago. Everything's a blur. AI is on the tip of everybody's tongue. But people seem to have forgotten that before AI, there were other things you could do around automation, process optimization, all sorts of things that they weren't necessarily doing anyhow. So is it wise of them to jump over proven areas and jump into AI, or does that come up in the conversations with your
So,
clients?
interestingly enough, I think people need to temper their expectations with AI.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think certain government agencies and certain enterprises are ready for AI from an infrastructure point of view, right? You've got vector databases already in there. You've got data tagging already all set up. You've got the security in place that you can just roll into the most sophisticated agentic AI and suddenly your business is humming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are others that they don't have that infrastructure in place, and they
Right.
think that they can just become a world-class sprinter without learning how to walk first.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's even more important is you have to have your guardrails in place, right? You don't
Mm-hmm.
want any Tom, Dick, and Harry in your company suddenly just writing code, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be introduced into your system without any safeguards in it. So the first thing you got to do is have, hey, what is my strategic plans and what is my guidelines on how we can use AI and what AI can I use? And even more importantly, and I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts about this, was I think people don't realize some of the dangers in AI. Like when you use a cloud-based AI, you're actually exposing your search parameters, your learning, your prompt engineering And your data, you're exposing it to Google, you're exposing it to the World Wide Web. So if you're exposing company proprietary data in there, and real example I will use is in one of the companies that I was helping, there were managers that were doing employee evaluations with a cloud-based AI. So now you're exposing PII data, all sorts of bad things can happen because they were not given any guidelines, right? But a lot of your managers and directors are overworked. You got to do evaluations for 50 people. AI can help you do that in 2 minutes, when it would take you maybe 12 hours to do it manually. So they
Or
were taking
never.
advantage of this, still thinking, hey, I'm doing the right thing. I'm being more productive for my company. But
Yeah.
there are unforeseen circumstances. You don't know what the side effects of what you're doing are. So I think there needs to be an understanding from an executive level, and they need to be able to communicate that all the way down to the employees on how to use AI and what guidelines to use it. So once you have that in place and the infrastructure in place, then you can start doing small pilot projects based on specific use cases and growing it from there. I think that's the most successful implementation of AI, as opposed to, hey, let's just let everybody go crazy and run with this. And then you end up in a bad situation.
Yeah, it's funny. So I've had innovation roles by title for 20 years or so at this point, and I learned early on that you can't just say, "Hey, let's innovate." You'll get ideas. A lot of them won't be good ideas. That's not the problem. It's just there's no target. So what are we trying to innovate on? Are you trying to innovate on better customer experience? Are you trying to innovate on how you do cash flow? There's lots of things that you can be very specific about that are still big enough that it gives people room to innovate, right? For AI purposes, how do you help any of your clients to frame like this is like you don't want to make it so small that nobody is excited about it because that's not good. That's against human nature. But you also don't want to make it so big that you just get totally random, like we should have peanut butter and jelly on Mondays. And somebody else is like, here's how I could make $2 trillion next year. How do you get them to frame that?
So I ask them the magic question. So whenever you walk into a client meeting, they've got 15 ideas, they want to do all this stuff. You ask them, hey, what is your goal?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you ask them what their goal is, then let's just make a real easy example, right? So their goal is to, let's say, increase ROI. So I'm like, what are you doing now to generate ROI, and what are your biggest driving factors in that? What are your products that do the most ROI? And let's apply AI to those specific products, and let's see how we can innovate the deployment of them or the development of them, because it's usually one of two things, right? It's how you deploy your product or how you develop your product. There's going to be some cost savings or some things there to make it better than your market competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And once you identify those specific things, you've now got a clean target of what you can hit, and it's in their expertise, right? You're not selling pots and pans when you're actually manufacturing aircraft parts. So you don't want to innovate something that's outside your ballpark. So now it's in their expertise. They've got a clear goal, and they've got a specific action that they can do to come back with a return on their investment at the end of the day.
Yep. Okay. Do you ask the question, how are you actually measuring ROI right now?
I think the baseline is probably the most important thing, right? Because if you
Yeah.
don't have a baseline, how do you know you're doing better or you're doing worse? I think the key to a good measurement piece is automated measurements. The last thing you want is for people to manually report their success or their failure, because
Yep.
as we know, those are like crime statistics, right? They are easily modified.
Right.
But if it's automated reporting, if you've got pieces built into your infrastructure that report automatically how you do things and how long it takes you and how much you spend to produce something or to do a service, then there's no gray zones. There's no manipulation of the data. And I think the smartest people today will make data-driven decisions as opposed to emotional decisions, right? Because when you do instinctual emotional decisions, you may be really lucky and get it, And even those people are probably 56, 57% of the time they're right. That's like a super good
Yeah.
percentage. But when you make data-driven decisions, I think
Yep.
it's logical. And unless there was a factor that, something happened that you weren't totally expecting that nobody could have predicted, you're most of the time going to be correct.
What I've found is, being able to make like time visible. So you might hear, oh, it takes us too long to service a new customer, or or to do a refill of something, whatever it happens to be. And okay, how much time does it take? It takes too much time. Okay. I went to Disney World with my family, and they can make passing a lot of time actually fun, which is interesting. Not what I'm trying to do if I'm doing enterprise consulting necessarily. But one of the things that I was like, all right, I can't get people to understand that measuring how long it takes to do something should not be that complicated. So while we're trying to figure out how to do that systematically because they didn't understand it, I used the Mickey Mouse method, which is to take a red card that they would give to somebody in line and measure how long it took for that person to get to the next checkpoint. And then they would, they just rotate the cards around, and they would have, that's why they could say, it's going to be a 45-minute wait. And you sit there and you hang out because you're in Florida and you wait your time, and then you do whatever is on the ride, and there you go. So I did the same thing. It's like, here's our stacks of paper that you're processing. I'm going to insert a red sheet every once in a while. When you're done, when you get it and you start it, you put your name and the date and time. When you are done, you put your name and date and time. And initially, people kept shuffling the red papers down farther to ignore them. And I was like, hello. So, but as soon as I was like, I'm not trying to get rid of your job. Nobody's trying to get rid of your job. We're trying to make this a smoother process. So it's easier for you, it's easier for the next person, it's easier for our customers. This is health insurance. Easier for brokers to deal with hundreds of thousands of customers they're managing. And that's a win, right? So if you want to keep working hard, everything takes too long, you're not happy, nobody's happy, probably time to go somewhere else. But otherwise, let's do some things that are not going to hurt. And once they realized that it was like a legitimate exercise, and they saw it was horrifying, like you could see that there's a lot of, in almost every situation I've been in, there's lots of round and rounds. So there's not a straight through process. It hits something and bounces back, and then bounces back and bounces back. And then it's like, and stalls, So making that visible, then people are like, oh yeah, why do we touch it 6 times? Like lean, Kaizen, all that kind of stuff. These are known problems. This is not the first place it's ever been slow to process some paperwork, right? So, finding simple ways to make it visible rather than, oh, we have to go from not driven by much of anything into data driven, which could sound really like a huge project and a very heavy lift.
Well, that's interesting because when you talk about Kaizen and other Japanese philosophies versus the American way of doing business, it reminds me of a story where how Japanese companies innovate is when you're a young executive, they start you out at the bottom and you work your way up, right? So you do every job that would have reported to you, and you work your way up to becoming a full-fledged, senior executive. And that's how they found to fix some of their broken processes. Because there was this young construction executive who saw, hey, why are we taking bags of concrete and manually bringing them up, 20 stories in a building and then mixing them up there when we can mix the concrete here and then use a vacuum tube to suck it up there and just flow the concrete down. And I mean, these are some things that you would never think like, hey, how do we fix this if you're the person doing the job, because you don't want to eliminate your job. You're the
Yeah,
person
right,
handing the paper to the next person.
right.
But that's where AI can really help us, right? If there's anything that's a repetitive action that has a very easy direction flow, it's like a binary direction flow, that's where you can stick AI. So instead of the person shuffling the paper, that person can do something more, I would say, significant and more impactful, not only for their career, but let's say something more to help the customer on the other end by doing more human decisions instead of just moving paper around.
Yep. Right. Do you have any specific examples of where you've taken that approach and been able to turn somebody's job from essentially, in my words, not yours necessarily, they're a human robot is what they've been doing, right? Just repetitive stuff that it can be kind of fun to zone out in that sort of work, and you're just like, okay, I'm doing my thing,
So,
but maybe not
yeah.
fulfilling exactly, right?
So let's talk about that on the super high tech space side, right? One of the things we do at Blue was to develop custom software that helps us process or either develop rocket engines or build rockets or kind of cycle them, right? So you can prep it for the next launch. So a lot of the software is custom stuff that's written by armies of developers. So what we did was we used large LLM models, multiple LLM models, depending on which type of development they were using. And that everyday code that they were using to write features, it would take about 8 weeks of work to do. Once we perfected the AI code writing, that 8 weeks turned into 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So now instead of them doing the heavy lifting on writing that code and debugging it and all that, you have AI doing that. And then they get to do more cooler stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when was this?
So
Time
this was
frame?
about a year into, as soon as ChatGPT, Anthropic, and all the other AIs went out, we adopted it right away when our new CEO came on board. We loved, he was a big AI proponent, and so we were given a free hand to innovate.
Yeah. Okay.
And I sit next to a bunch of developers, so I'm always working with them on it to help them with this stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so that's a much higher level example. I mean, there's a lot of fear right now. Obviously, there's always been fear about automation. That's not new, right? We're covering a whole bunch of stuff. So one thing I wanted to bring up because we've had so much fun anyhow. So when we first met, you noticed this on my desk. You want to tell people what this is, or shall I do the
Go ahead,
unveiling?
you do the honors. It's your
So,
toy.
so this is Call of Duty Bomb Monkey. So this is one of the things that you throw out if you're in the game, and it distracts people. Zombies typically they gather and then it blows up because it's a bomb. And it's interesting to me when people like. I purposely had set it so that it was potentially
In view?
like right on the edge
Yeah.
of my desk, so some people would notice it. I also have I have some signed autographed pieces from various musicians because I have a music background that are behind me in my office upstairs. And sometimes people are like, "Hey, that's James Hetfield. Was that signed by him?" And it opens up a different conversation, which I think is interesting. One of my last really major pushes was pretty groundbreaking work. There was a period around 2006, 2008 about gamification and gaming as a metaphor for collaboration. And part of the reason I like Call of Duty is that I'm much more interested in teamwork than I am about solo performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I threw out an invitation back when Twitter was a real useful thing and fun to be in, and more like honest. I put out a call for people to say, hey, if you're into gaming, things like Call of Duty, I'd love to meet with you. We could game and talk about how does this potentially apply to the enterprise. So from your experience, do you use games as a way to bring together teams? Or the things that you think you've learned from playing games that apply directly to how you approach leadership and teamwork and things like that?
Absolutely. I think one of the greatest things, and my wife would probably kill me for saying this, is when
Don't
you
listen.
when you play computer games, and I encourage my kids to do them too. We used to play together as a family. We play Borderlands together as a family in
Okay.
the same room with multiple PlayStations. And back in my ISP days, we had a direct connection into May East, so we had maybe a tenth of a second faster than everybody else when we were building these strategy games where you would build armies and attack each other and stuff.
Yep.
And we would actually win because a tenth of a second over an hour or two gives you like a 7 or 8, or I don't even know what the math is, a lot
Yeah.
more builds than everybody else. So eventually you crush people just from build stuff. But what IT is a very stressful business, right? You're
Yeah.
putting in a lot of hours. There's a lot of brain work involved, and you need to relax. And I think there were times where we would play some PvP, shooter games networked together so there was no delay and you could scream at each other on the next cubicle over because it was fun, right? And you
Right.
usually do this like 6 or 7 o'clock at night when you put
Yeah.
in the whole day and you got to be there for another 6 or 7 hours. So you take a half an hour or an hour to play, and I
Yep.
think the teamwork that is built is almost like a football or a basketball team when you travel together and you do your road games and stuff. That's
Yep.
how it is. We
Right.
actually also play some flag football.
Okay.
It's a physical thing, or you go to happy hour together and you build up that camaraderie. Because IT is one of those businesses where if the team likes each other, they will put in more effort and you will solve more problems. So even as a team, if you're able to solve 2 or 3 more problems a week, if you put that out over a year, that's over 100 more problems than you were able to solve together because you like each other. If you
Right.
don't
Yeah.
like each other and you don't like hanging out, at 5 o'clock, people are just punching out and going home. That's a lot
Yep.
less productivity there.
Yeah.
So there are many companies that I've been involved with where they had a program where they do one of the things we do was when the next Star Wars movie came out, we'd buy tickets for everybody. And you'd all go to the theater together. Back in the
Yeah.
days when you people would still go to movies.
Yeah. I
And I think that kind of shared experience brings a lot from a teamwork perspective. It brings a lot, it gets your competitive juices flowing. You want to spend more time at work. Because at the end of the day, you probably spend more waking hours with the people you work with than your
right.
family. So you got
Yeah.
to get along and you got to like these people. And if
Right.
you don't, then you got to make some changes, right? Or you're going to be unhappy.
Right. Yeah. So in game, you can shoot them in the back. Only in a virtual
Only in game.
situation.
Yes, only in game. We're
Yes.
not saying you do that in real life.
Yeah. So I've actually made some really good friends that I'm still in touch with, 20 years later. The way we met was through games. And actually, I was doing workshops on, we were calling it Enterprise 2.0 at the time, or Enterprise Social, or, lots of different terms. Knowledge Management 2.0, if you wanted to go really far back. I was doing a workshop in Toronto, and I needed extra help to be able to run the workshop because I was a one-man company at that point. So one of my buddies, Rob, who I'd never worked with, but we'd been gaming together for 3 or 4 years at that point. We knew how we thought, and we had a repertoire of how we would interact and all, and like you could trust that I had his back, he had my back, essentially, right, in game and the kind of things we were playing. So the first time I met him, among other things, I didn't realize he was like 6'5", because I'd never seen him, and I was like, oh my God, what? How did this happen? My perception of him was so very different from what reality was. But we like prepped. I flew in the night before. We talked for like an hour or two, and had been prepping before that on, here's what I need you to do. This is what I'll do. Then we'll rotate and do these things. And then we jumped into it, and it was fantastic. Like instantaneously. It was part of the story of this workshop was, if you want to understand how social in an enterprise setting can be useful, here's a perfect example. We'd actually never met in person or worked together. This is way before Zoom existed. This is before WebEx tanks, rightfully. So that was like, so you can, the bond that you can create through these things, it might seem like it's really simple that, why does anybody need to know what you had on your toast today? If there's some way that you can make a connection, a human connection with people that you're working with or partnering with or selling to or whatever, that what else do we have? If it's all just, like impersonal bean counting, just the facts, man, that's not a whole lot of fun. Like, why bother even doing any of this stuff when you can make it like you care about your colleagues and you can have fun with them? And sometimes it sucks, but that they're there to help you. Have you found, do people naturally incline, have you like incubated people into or converting people into thinking, I'm not a gamer, so therefore I can't do this? Well, like, would it hurt to try, or how do you work around that potentially?
I think interestingly enough, most people who are technical are gamers, right?
Okay, yeah.
Very, very few, I would say less than 1% of 1% are non-gamers. It's
Okay.
just a question of which game do you play and can you convert
Yeah.
them to your side. So if they're Xbox people, they might not like PlayStation, and then if they're PlayStation people, they may not like PC gaming, you know. So I think it's a question of, hey, is there a platform that you can all play with, and is that okay? And if there's none, then you can do other things, right? You could play fantasy football together. You can play other games together that are team related. I think it doesn't even matter whether it's a computer game, a PlayStation game, or a fantasy football game. It's do something together as a team that builds that camaraderie at the end of the day. I mean, I still remember, like you, I played a lot of Destiny back when Destiny was hot. And I played with the same team, I think, for 3 years. We started at like, I think it was 10 or 11 o'clock after dinner, and we'd play till 2 in the morning. Especially when a new module would come out, a new update would come out, we would play all night.
Right.
And then, of course, I would be bombed at work the next day, but it was worth it because you were there with your friends, right? And these are people you would trust with your life. You know,
Yeah,
you go on
exactly.
vacation with these folks, even though you've never met them before, because
Yep.
you've gamed with them so much.
Right. Yeah. Did you find would you try to bring in, business people or other people who are non-technical anyhow along for the experience?
I've never brought in. Well, there were some business people that were geeks too, and you could tell
Okay.
when you're talking to them and stuff. But non-technical people, we usually talk sports or something different
Okay.
like
Yeah.
that. And there are some customers that you can tell. I think the first time when I saw your stuff, I knew you were a gamer. But
Yeah.
even if you can drop hints about video games and stuff, and people
Yeah.
have a very binary reaction, right? Oh, that's
Yeah.
for kids. I would never do that. Blah blah
Yeah. Yeah.
blah. Or
Right.
or they're gamers themselves and they love it, right?
Yeah. Right. Okay.
So I think you can drop some hints here and there
Yeah.
and see.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I wanted to round this out on. There's so many things that we could talk about.
We could do another session down the road. I mean, I have a whole
Yeah.
list of stuff I was going to ask you, but that's okay.
Oh, okay. You threw out some wild card ideas that we could talk about. I'm going to pick on one, which is physical robots. So there's all the rage these days is about digital robots, right? And automated AI, chatbots, things like that. And now that I know more about your background, I'm sure there's all sorts of physical robot stuff that you've been involved in. What do you think about physical robots coming to the workplace, or coming to normal businesses that aren't hyper specialized, that would, like, manufacturing system, things where robotics have happened already, but not specifically built robots for only a single purpose, like assembling the frame of a car, but in, sort of real life, daily work.
What do I think of those, or robotics in physical, or robotics in general?
Yeah. What's going to impact regular businesses about physical robots, the coming year or two,
So
whatever
I
time.
think right now, like everything else, right? I think we all remember when the flat screen plasmas first came out. They were like a ridiculous amount of money. Like it was,
Yeah.
what is it, 50, 100,000 for a flat screen, and
Yep.
now it's like a regular person can afford a flat screen. It's like standard. Now nobody has the giant box TVs anymore.
Oh yeah.
But that happened at scale, right? And it took time from the time the first cool stuff came out to what they
Yep.
are today.
Right.
So I think the first wave of domestic common robots have come out as vacuum cleaners and in these cleaning machines that people can afford now. And the next wave, which are the higher, I would say, mobility and the higher ability robots, are being used by specialized manufacturing companies today, like car companies, to build a repetitive work, to lift heavy stuff where humans are assisted by robots or the robots are doing the work themselves. And if you look at, like, Boston Robotics have a bunch of autonomous robots that do cool stuff for them.
Yep.
What's really scary about that is if you look at what's happening in Ukraine now, they have robots that are doing like Terminator stuff, like carrying machine guns, carrying rocket launchers, and
Yeah.
they are very effective. because at the end of the
Right.
day, your robots can just be mass manufactured, and it takes a long time to bring a human to like 20, 25 years old and be of fighting shape. So
Right.
eventually the math there will win out on the robots. And now you have robotic vehicles, and it's always everything. Like the military gets the first line, like the internet was in the military first to the
Yeah.
DARPA, and then it went to the regular person. So they now have robots that are like submarines, and they have autonomous planes now flying better than human pilots in dogfights and stuff. It's already been proven, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think eventually that will come to us in the form of robotic taxis, which they're experimenting with now.
Yep.
And a lot of the common stuff that humans would do will go towards robotics because it's just a question of scale and mass production.
Hmm. Yeah.
So my guess is in about 10 or 15 years, you're going to see there won't, like they say, if you're born today, you probably won't learn how to drive.
Mm. Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of autopilots now, and these automated super cruise on the freeways and stuff, and
Yeah.
you have Tesla's full self-driving. That's eventually they're going to get rid of that steering wheel. We
Right.
won't need it, right? Driving
Right.
won't be something fun anymore. You just get into a vehicle and it will get you to where you're going, right? And
Right.
eventually we'll have transporters, but that's another story altogether.
Yes.
Uh, so I think we're in a magical time right now. Robots and along with AI, AI is going to help robots because you need AI to help you learn to do stuff and to do the repetitive human actions and go beyond that. So I think eventually a lot of the domestic work that we're doing is maybe you'll have somebody to walk your dog for you in the rain if you don't want to do it anymore, right?
Your human robot can walk your robot dog.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody wins.
So eventually, a lot of the domestic chores you don't like doing, like vacuuming or cleaning your house, robots will take care of all of that, right?
Right. Yeah. It's the Jetsons.
Exactly. And where are our flying cars? That's what I want to know. We were promised
Yeah.
that decades ago.
I know. Yeah. Well, and living in space somehow with little individual houses floating.
We're
randomly
getting
through
there.
space.
There's actually a lot. One of the things we did at Blue was we were designing, and we had prototypes of space habitats and stuff. It was called Blue Ring, and that was going to be the stepping stone to the moon. So what we wanted to do first was start life in orbit in these space stations, build from there, and then to the moon, start building habitats on the moon, and eventually to Mars. I think what Elon wanted to do was go directly to Mars, just skip all
Right.
that stuff and go
Right.
directly there.
Yes.
But with that, then you get data centers in space and a whole bunch of other. So this was the type of conversation you'd have at lunch with the rocket scientists. Like, hey, how are we going to build this? How are
Right.
we going to get terabytes of data in orbit back down to Earth, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Once upon a time, I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but I was like, I thought I'm going to have the first recording studio in space. And then I was thinking through, so how do you make sure, like tape tension and things like that? How do you maintain that? And the answer is you wouldn't use tape anymore, among other things, right? So that was like in the in-between stage from physical tape to purely digital when that was transitioning. But I think it's funny in hindsight that I thought that was a thing that anybody would care about.
Well, here's the biggest problem we have that's stopping us from going to full space exploration today, right? And it's not what you think. It's really radiation because there's a lot of radiation that goes out in space, and because we have the Earth's atmosphere, that protects us from those effects. But one of the reasons why satellites get fried up there and electronics go away is unless you've got radiation shielding for your stuff and you've got double and triple redundancies, eventually it fails, right? Because you don't have
Right.
the Earth's atmosphere to protect you.
Right.
And that's why people, when you travel to Mars, if we don't solve that radiation problem, people are going to die of radioactive poisoning. That's what's limiting you right now from living in space forever. How do we solve that problem? Once we solve that, I think everything else follows.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, so there's plenty more we could talk about. We should circle back and continue that. If people want to get in touch with you for fractional CIO work or just to get to know you and have a conversation, what's your preferred?
Just hit me up on LinkedIn.
Sure. Okay, great. Well, JJ, thank you so much for joining me in Next Future Today. We've covered a lot more territory than I typically do, which is kind of amazing unto itself because that's very common. But this is there's a lot of uncommon experiences that you have that I think are really interesting. I hope it inspires people to actually do something to start what their next future is today, which is the whole point of the podcast.
Thank you, Dan. That's a pleasure. And I'm hoping this isn't our last conversation, that we
Yes.
continue our conversation.
Exactly. Maybe it will involve tiny monkeys.
Have a great week.
Thanks, JJ.
Bye.